I talk to you or to the camera?
To me. Well, hello. Thank you for joining us today for Going Deeper. Thank you so much, Keith, for your message this morning, continuing on in our series in John. Now, one of the main motivations that we've got for this series actually comes out of Peter's writing, where he's saying, always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks about the hope that you have. And this morning, one of the things, out of a number of things, that really grabbed my attention is you zoomed in on the hope we have that Jesus articulated in John 3:16. And what caught my attention is that, Keith, I know that you're not new at this game, but the truth of that passage, of that verse, seemed to be very, very real to you. You were very passionate as you were speaking about what it is that Christ has done. You said something like, how do we even hold our head up if it weren't for that forgiveness? Can you let us in a little bit on even now for you, what's going on when you grapple with that hope, with that truth?
Yes, I can try succinctly. To sum it up, I think as I get older, I actually, and I think if not all, most people who are anyway getting towards the senior years of life, this kind of hope is more and more a reality, in the sense that most of the studies that look at the well-being of older people place the senior years in a fairly positive light, in that there is a greater level of satisfaction or contentment, not as much financial pressure, not as many vocational pressures. But I think that's a pencil and paper kind of test, rather than my own experience, and it's not a harsh experience at all, but it's an experience that says, as life is gradually or more than gradually closing in on you, where you just can't do the things that either you would like to do or you used to be able to do, how do you cope with that without, as I've said on other occasions, without getting grumpy? How do you grow old graciously? And for me personally, and I've said this before and it's true, I could very easily be a grumpy old man. And I think Marg, although she says I'm not, which is great, but she knows I could be. If in actual fact it was about performance or even about opportunity. I think one of Marg's friends said, as you get older, you gradually or more than gradually become invisible. I don't experience that in any major way, except that older people in our society are not given the same level of attention as younger people who are probably more able to be glamorous or beautiful or whatever. So I would say this about all stages of life, because when I was, say, very hectically vocationally involved, I would have needed security and grace at least as much as I do now, but I hadn't learnt as deeply about it. But all I'm saying is that every stage of life, and certainly at this stage of life, unless there's the opportunity to go beyond the superficial or even what our society says is really important or valuable or whatever, then we will gradually or more than gradually become almost entombed in a acceptance or recognition that we don't count.
Right.
And because there's the possibility, the reality of getting a deeper understanding of what's really important. And I would include relationships in that, so that if I get grumpy, it impacts my relationships, and therefore that I can imagine the trauma of younger families in this COVID situation, but I can also imagine the cabin fever of even two older people, basically being stuck with each other almost 24/7, and that not working out very well at all. So somehow or another there's got to be grace in there, and the opportunity to value the other person and to care and to love for them. So you're right. The idea of Rabboni, where I worship because of who Jesus is, not only what he taught and what he did on earth, but on who he is, that's my saving grace every day.
So it's interesting that you say the every day. That's my saving grace every day. When we understand Rabboni as master and teacher, and this idea that how do I face the day, I think was something else that you said. How do I face the day? What does that mean to you in this idea of every day? What does that look like every day for Keith? I know that I could turn into grumpy old Keith. I know I can be grumpy old Jeff. I get reminded of that too. How does this message of grace, the reality of this master teacher Rabboni, what does that look like for you, recognising that that could be my reality, grumpy Keith, day by day? How are you reminding yourself of this master teacher of grace day by day?
I don't wake up very well.
Yep.
I wake up fairly slowly, and I normally wake up either having thought about in the middle of the night or almost immediately having come to mind anything that might be a challenge or a difficulty that potentially lies ahead of me during the day. And what I find is that if I'm anxious and one area of my life is resolved and therefore I don't need to be anxious about it, I just pop the next one up to that.
Yep.
So I can actually get anxious about going shopping.
Yep.
Which I normally would not be, but about, I won't go into detail, but just about anything almost. So I have a bit of a ritual that after I've had my shower and whatever, the first thing I do, and this would be, I'd say 9 out of 10 or even 99 out of 100, I have a little devotional book that I recognise isn't everybody's major helper, but for me it's a devotional book in which the writer purports to be Jesus and gives Jesus' perspective on life at the beginning of every day. And I think that's a bit almost outrageous to purport to be Jesus, but because she basically just takes it from Scripture, so I think it's okay. So I'm reminded about the key realities of this day, which are that not only am I alive, but he's alive, that his Spirit is in me, that he can work everything together for good. He can actually come into any situation in a wiser, longer term constructive way than I could ever think about, and therefore let this be a prompt to me to, in whatever comes up in that day, to give it to him and to invite him in. You know, as Peter says, because I don't think this only refers to salvation, but the best invitation we ever had in our lives. Just to include the Spirit of God and the way of God in whatever is going, and then to reflect on if it goes well, thank him, because he's the author of that. If it doesn't go well, then stay secure in the fact that he's never going to leave me, and that he's wiser and more powerful than I can ever imagine, and he will bring good out of even the worst. So that I have a tendency to catastrophize, and to even in my evening time to think about the worst possible scenario that either is happening or could happen. And therefore you have to reframe that catastrophizing into a secure situation that says, I'll never test you beyond what you are able to go through.
I love that you phrased that as, it's that reminding you of the key reality. That there are many things that might make me anxious that I could catastrophise about, but there is a greater reality. It's his. He's got it. Think about then, so for me as an individual, desiring to steward my own heart towards Christ, it needs reminding of that ultimate reality, and I need a teacher to do that. I love that you've got a resource that almost feels like it's Jesus teaching you directly. How does that apply to one another, to the body of Christ? You said, you made a point in your message about recognising that we're all teachers. We all carry that. What responsibility then do we have in the body with one another, do you think, as teachers?
I'll have to be very, very brief because this is not only crucial, but it could be quite an expansive subject. But I would summarise by saying the first thing is that the one another, if we accept God as creator and that he created everybody in his image, it's a marred image, but so therefore we are all of incredibly valuable stuff.
Yes.
Then that changes my view of every person, whether they are in the deepest relationship with me, such as Marg, my wife, or whether I pass them in the street as a person who seems obviously to be struggling or whatever. There's the one perspective that says this person is just as valuable as I am, and they are, in God's sight, a person to be loved and cared for and valued. So every relationship is a gift and also a responsibility. But it also allows me to see that, if I can just go back to what I shared in the sermon, I didn't have time to go into it, but those words of life, words to build a life on, they are actually, in my experience and assessment, the wisest teachings I have ever read. The Sermon on the Mount.
Yes.
They are not easy teachings, and they are not teachings that I am able always to follow. But I also believe, and this is also from a well-being and psychological perspective, they are the essence of living healthily and well. So that when there's the great emphasis on love and grace, on security and forgiveness, I think they are the key issues for any ongoing relationship, so that I seek to relate to other people, not in a wishy-washy kind of everything's great, I'm not going to address the difficulty or whatever, speak the truth in love when that's appropriate, but it'd be in love and at the right time and the right way. But actually to approach by the Spirit of God's enabling within me every relationship as not only a great privilege and opportunity in terms of for me, but also potentially in almost incremental ways to build into those other people something of the love and grace of God.
Yeah.
Can I give you an example? And I try to do this. I go for a walk most days, and now I mostly just walk around Adcock Park because I think it's quite a beautiful place. I walk to it, and I'd say about every second day on an average, there's a lady who walks, and she walks the opposite way from me, and she first took my attention because a lot of people say hello to you and nod to you, but there was no response from her. She normally wears a hoodie, and she wears very dark glasses.
Yep.
And as far as I could see, she acknowledges nobody
Yep.
or nothing. I felt the opportunity to just very, very gradually try to connect with that person. So that at first I just started nodding.
Yep.
So for several times I just nodded. And after about 3 or 4 times she nodded back.
Yep.
Which is strange because I didn't think she was even going to look at me, but she nodded.
I love it. Yep.
This is probably 6 or 7 weeks later, and yesterday she not only said hello, but she raised her hand
Wow.
to say hi.
It's progress.
That is progress. So I actually, in a funny kind of way, just think that I don't know what's in her life. I don't know who she is, whatever. Don't know where she lives.
Yep.
Don't need to know any of that. But just for us to try and be something, even in very small ways, of the love and grace of God, because they are incredibly valuable people.
Just acknowledging another human.
Yeah.
I love how so John 3:16, fairly logical, it's followed by John 3:17, where Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. And Candace, you'd be happy to know that the word world is cosmos. So thinking then, about what that means to be stewarding our own hearts toward grace, and then there's also this one anotherness. How then do we carry this hope to the world? What does that mean to the world? Jesus came not to condemn the world, but to save the world. We're carrying that hope. That's the hope that allows us to lift our head up each day, to face the day. What does it mean for us to be carrying that truth in the world, do you think?
I think, first of all, it means probably our world, so that whatever opportunity each of us have, that we recognise the privilege of those interrelationships, and also something of the opportunity of them to be God's colours and flavours, because that salt and light, and as you reminded us, I think Peter's both challenge and encouragement is that we would always have ready some way of, and these are my words, of blessing other people, but to always, if we have the opportunity to speak into their lives in any way whatsoever, to do it with respect and with gentleness.
Yep.
So that with those kind of guidelines, that we should, as much as possible, get our centre of attention away from self to God, and also to recognise that we are impacting each other in indelible ways every day. We don't feel like as if we are, or there's no external indicator of that usually or often. But actually the major learning in life is modelling. The major life changes that happen to us are through people and who they are and what they say when actually their words back up the kind of... Now, I don't mean to say in any way that I'm even a good example of the love and grace of God, but just seeking to take whatever opportunity there is to be outside of self and attentive to, not preoccupied with the world around me, but attentive to, so that any invitation, whether it's overt or covert, to be the flavours and the colours of God, which are mainly love and grace, but they could be all different kind, whatever Jesus expressed, and sometimes it was strong words. Some of Jesus' teaching was very stern and a rebuke, but it was appropriate, and I believe he did it with the best interests of the person and as appropriately as possible.
A final question, or it's probably an opportunity for you to maybe provide some encouragement. I love that you called out not only this idea of Jesus as teacher and even Nicodemus as teacher, but joined the dots just in terms of the importance of teachers. Plenty of teachers within the Coast community family, preschool, primary school, high school, tertiary. Any encouragement from you for our teachers at this time?
Yes, I don't find that difficult at all. Just as an aside, I had, during my school time, always planned to be a teacher. I wanted to be a maths and science teacher. When it actually came to the crunch, our family moved interstate and nobody had ever gone to university, so I just went to work, and because I liked figures, I went into accountancy. So I've always had in my heart actually a thought that, and I don't mean this seriously, that I missed my first calling. I don't believe I did, but I love the idea of being a teacher. I think pastoring is towards the most difficult vocation, but being a school teacher or a preschool teacher is towards the most difficult. And if you wonder about that, I think that the only reason why many teachers survive and can keep coming back is that they have many sabbaticals built into their lives and their responsibilities. If that wasn't true, if there weren't term holidays, and many teachers don't take the whole of that term holiday, they do some work, and teachers usually work way beyond 9 till 3 or whatever. And the discipline side of teaching is a very, very difficult and draining to remain a compassionate person and keep whatever compassionate culture, as I believe our school does, because I go into that culture just peripherally every 3 months through mentoring, and I just can sense the children and the staff. There's a special culture there that's incredibly powerful to these children who are very much in formation. So I actually believe that our society does not value this vocation anywhere near as highly as it could or it should, because it's not only very difficult, but it's absolutely crucial to these formative years of people's life. Parents, of course, are the major contributors, but let's never underestimate how important teachers are.
Totally agree. Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you for being our teacher today. I hope that there's plenty in there for you to be thinking about, meditating on, sharing in your home groups this week. Thank you again, Keith. That's always a blessing to us. And so we'll see you next week. Bye for now.